I still remember the way the sun hit his uniform that morning. It was June, the kind of morning that makes you believe nothing bad could ever happen. The air smelled like cut grass and engine oil, and the town buzzed with people waving flags, pretending to be brave. James looked so handsome in that pressed jacket, all confidence and promise. He smiled like it was just another workday, like he'd be home before dinner. I wanted to believe him, so I did. He kissed me on the porch before boarding the bus, his fingers brushing a tear off my cheek. "I'll write you every week," he said. "You'll get sick of hearing from me." I laughed, but it caught in my throat. "You better," I said, "or I'll come drag you back myself." He grinned, that boyish grin I fell in love with. Then he climbed the steps, turned once, and waved. The bus engine growled, the crowd cheered, and just like that, the love of my life disappeared down the road, leaving dust in the air and a hollow in my chest. I stood there until the bus vanished, until everyone else went home. The silence that followed was louder than any goodbye. I walked back into the house, still smelling his cologne on my sweater, and told myself it was only for a little while. We'd written our plans on napkins: buy a small house with a porch, maybe a dog, definitely kids. He promised me forever, and I believed him, because that's what love does. The first few weeks were strange. The house felt too quiet, the bed too big. I kept the radio on at all hours just to fill the emptiness. I'd make dinner for two and end up eating alone, pretending he'd be home any minute. Then the letters started coming. The first one arrived a week after he left. The envelope was smudged with dust, his handwriting a little shaky but familiar. He told me the bass was loud and hot, the guys were decent, and he was fine. "Don't worry, Ev," he wrote. "I'm still your same fool, just with a bigger hat and a louder alarm clock." I laughed and cried reading it, clutching the paper like it was his hand. After that, the letters became my life. Every week I'd run to the mailbox like a kid on Christmas morning. He wrote about the sunrises, the camaraderie, the noise that never stopped. He said he missed my cooking and dreamed of my peach pie. I started baking one every Sunday, setting a slice aside for him, even though he wasn't there. It became my little ritual, a promise I kept alive. The neighbors would stop by, asking if I'd heard from him, and I'd smile proudly, showing them his latest letter. They'd nod, half jealous, half pitying. Everyone had someone gone, a brother, a son, a husband. Our town was small, and the war had stretched its shadow over every porch. At night, I'd lie in bed and read his words out loud, pretending he was beside me. Sometimes I'd answer before falling asleep, whispering into the dark, "I miss you too." The mail became my heartbeat, steady, dependable, full of hope. One day, about 3 months in, I got a small package instead of a letter. Inside was a tiny seashell, pale pink, smooth as glass. There was a note that said, "Found this near the water. Reminded me of you. All soft edges, even when the world's hard." I pressed it to my lips and cried for an hour. I still keep that shell in my nightstand. As the months passed, I learned to live in half-light. Not happy, not broken, just waiting. I worked mornings at the diner, served coffee to farmers and widows, smiled when I could, but my eyes always drifted to the clock. Every night I'd come home, check the mailbox, and exhale when I saw his handwriting. It kept me breathing. Then one week the letter didn't come. I told myself the mail was just slow. Maybe he was moving bases. Maybe he was busy. I checked again the next day, and the day after that. Nothing. The third week, I started pacing by the window every morning. I'd see the mail truck, heart pounding, hands trembling, but the mailbox stayed empty. When the fourth week came with no word, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at his last letter. The ink had started to fade where I'd read it too many times. It ended with, "Don't you dare give up on me." I traced the words with my finger and whispered, "I won't." The silence was its own kind of war. Every day became heavier. I stopped baking, stopped sleeping. The radio played news reports I couldn't bear to hear, words like missing, ambush, casualties. I turned it off, but the silence screamed louder. Then one morning, there was a knock at the door. My hands shook as I opened it, half expecting a miracle. Instead, there stood a young soldier in uniform, hat in his hands, eyes soft with pity. My knees went weak before he even spoke. He said my name gently, like he didn't want to break me. "Mrs. Harper," he began, "I served with your husband." My heart stopped. "Is he?" I couldn't finish. He swallowed hard. "He saved my life," he said. "We got separated during a mission. They're still looking for him." "I'm so sorry." "Still looking." That was all I heard. Not gone. Not dead. Still looking. I clung to those words like a lifeline. I thanked the soldier, closed the door, and slid to the floor, clutching the seashell in my hand. I whispered, "He's coming home." He promised. The next weeks blurred together, letters to the base, calls to anyone who'd listen. Every answer was the same: "We don't have confirmation yet." So I waited. I waited through autumn, through Christmas, through spring. I planted marigolds out front because he liked their color. I painted the porch the way we'd planned. Every sunrise I whispered, "Come home," and every night I whispered, "Maybe tomorrow." People told me to move on, but how do you move on from half a life? The wives who'd lost theirs got closure. They had funerals, folded flags, something final. I had nothing but an open door and hope that refused to die. Years passed that way. Seasons came and went, and so did people. The war ended, the parades came back, the uniforms disappeared from the streets, but I was still waiting. They called it missing in action. I called it not over. Every once in a while, I'd dream of him walking up the path, smile crooked, voice soft. I'd wake up reaching for his hand, only to touch an empty pillow. Still, I never let myself believe he was gone. I couldn't. Loving him had become my habit, my heartbeat, my religion. And somewhere deep down, I kept hearing his voice from that morning at the bus stop. "I'll write you every week." So I waited. And I waited. Because when you love someone that deeply, time stops meaning what it used to. Days, months, years. They blur into one long heartbeat that just won't quit. The years after the war were quiet, but not the kind of quiet that feels peaceful. It was the kind that echoes, the kind that reminds you every second of what's missing. People in town moved on with their lives. New babies, new cars, new gossip. But my world stayed the same. I woke up every morning at 7, brewed 2 cups of coffee out of habit, and set one across from me at the table. His cup. His place. Every morning, without fail. At first, people came around. Neighbors, church ladies, even the postman would stop by to ask if there was any news. I'd smile, shake my head, and say, "Not yet." After a while, the visits stopped. I could see it in their eyes, that quiet pity that says she's still waiting. They meant well, but they didn't understand. For them, time moved forward. For me, it just spun in circles around the day he left. But I kept writing. Every Sunday evening, I'd sit at that same table and write James a letter. I'd tell him about the weather, the marigolds, the broken fence out back, the way Mrs. Cooper's cat kept sneaking into my yard. I'd tell him about the diner, about how the jukebox still played our song, Unchained Melody. I'd write like he was still reading, like maybe somewhere, somehow, he'd find them. I stacked those letters in a wooden box under my bed, neat piles tied with string. By the second year, there were dozens. By the 5th, hundreds. I'd started every single one the same way. "My darling James." The post office clerk once told me gently, "You know, ma'am, those can't be delivered." I smiled and said, "Maybe not by you." He never asked again. Sometimes, when I'd finish writing, I'd sit outside on the porch and talk to the night like it could hear me. I'd tell the moon to carry my words wherever he was. I know how crazy that sounds, but when you've got no one left to talk to, you start talking to the sky. In the 3rd year, the army sent an official letter. I still remember the feel of the envelope, thick and heavy like it knew it carried heartbreak. I couldn't open it at first. I just sat there, staring at my name typed neat and cold. When I finally tore it open, the words blurred through my tears. Status. Missing. Presumed deceased. Presumed. That word haunted me. Not confirmed. Not certain. Just presumed. How could they presume something about a man who promised me forever? I folded the letter and tucked it into the box with the rest. If they couldn't find him, that didn't mean he was gone. It just meant they weren't looking hard enough. After that, I stopped wearing color for a while. My wardrobe turned into shades of gray and brown. I didn't notice it at first, but one day my friend Clara said, "Ev, you look like you're fading with him." That hit hard. That night I pulled out one of my old yellow dresses, the one James said made me look like summer. I wore it the next day to the diner. It didn't bring him back, but it made me feel a little closer to the woman he loved. The war had ended by then. Soldiers came home, parades filled the streets, families hugged their heroes. I stood on the sidewalk watching other wives cry tears of joy, clutching their husbands like they'd never let go again. I clapped and smiled, but inside I was screaming. My soldier wasn't in that parade. Afterward, people stopped talking about the war. The country moved on, the world moved on, but my heart stayed behind. One afternoon, about 8 years after the last letter, I went into the attic looking for a box of Christmas lights. Instead, I found James's old coat. It still smelled faintly like him, that mix of soap and tobacco. I sat down on the floor and cried into the fabric until my face hurt. Then I found a small note in the pocket, one I'd forgotten about. His handwriting, simple and crooked, said, "Don't forget to laugh, Ev. Promise me that." I laughed through the tears. It felt wrong and right all at once. After that, I made a decision. I couldn't keep dying every day waiting for news that might never come. But I couldn't let him go either. So I built a life around the waiting. I kept working at the diner, picked up painting, joined the church choir. The other women would talk about their husbands snoring, their kids' college plans, their grandchildren. I'd smile and say, "I'm still waiting on mine." Sometimes they'd look sad for me, but I wasn't sad all the time anymore. I had found a rhythm, not happiness, exactly, but something steady. There was a man who came into the diner often. Name was Harold. Quiet, kind, widowed too early. He'd always sit in the same booth and order coffee and pie. Over time, he started staying longer, talking more. He'd ask about my day, about the weather, about my paintings. He never pried about James, and I appreciated that. One evening, he said, "You ever get tired of waiting?" I looked at him for a long time and said, "Every day." He nodded and said, "But you still do it." I smiled. "That's love, Harold. It doesn't quit, even when it should." He didn't argue. Years passed that way. Harold became a friend, then a companion. People whispered that we were sweet on each other, but it wasn't like that. He was company in a lonely world. He understood the kind of silence that lives in a person after loss. When I turned 50, the town held a reunion for veterans and families. I went, not because I thought I'd find James there, but because I wanted to feel close to that part of my life again. The community hall was filled with flags, laughter, and music. I stood near the back, holding a picture of James in his uniform. A young soldier came up and said, "Ma'am, was he yours?" I smiled and said, "Still is." That night, I came home and wrote another letter. I told him how proud I was of him, how I'd kept my promise to laugh, even when it hurt. I ended it the same way I always had. "I love you, James. Always will." I tucked it into the box under my bed, now overflowing with years of unsent words. Sometimes, I'd pull one out at random and read it to remind myself that even if the world forgot, I hadn't. Then, one day, a letter arrived. It was small, yellowed, the edges frayed. I almost didn't recognize the handwriting at first. Older, rougher, shakier. But it was his. My breath caught in my throat as I tore it open. The first line read, "My dearest Evelyn, I don't know if this will ever reach you." My hands shook so badly I had to sit down. The letter was dated years before, during the war. It must have been lost, delayed, maybe found by someone cleaning out an old mail depot. He wrote about missing me, about the noise of the jungle, about dreaming of home. The last line said, "If I don't make it back, know that loving you was the best thing I ever did." I pressed that letter to my chest and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. After all that waiting, it wasn't closure. It was a whisper from the past, floating across time to remind me that I hadn't been forgotten. That night, I lit a candle by the window and left it burning till dawn. I whispered to the dark, "I got your letter, James." And for the first time in years, I slept through the night. Time doesn't stop just because your heart does. It moves on, quietly, steadily, like water wearing down stone. One day you wake up and realize your hands look older, your eyes softer, your voice quieter. You start measuring years not by calendars, but by how many times you've told yourself, maybe this will be the year he comes home. By the time I turned 60, most of the people who remembered James had either moved away or passed on. The diner had new owners. The old jukebox that once played our song had been replaced with something digital. The world changed, but my love didn't. It just aged with me. Every now and then, the army would send another notice, a list of recovered names, identified remains, newly opened cases. I'd read each one like a prayer, holding my breath for his. It never was. Eventually, I stopped opening them. There's only so many times you can teach your heart to break gracefully. The box of letters under my bed grew heavy, not just in weight, but in memory. Sometimes I'd pull it out and touch the envelopes, feel the texture of the paper, imagine the warmth of his hands on the other side of time. The ink had faded, but the love hadn't. I started writing fewer letters after I turned 65. My eyesight wasn't what it used to be, and my hands shook too much to hold a pen steady. Instead, I'd talk out loud to him, like he was still sitting across the table. I'd tell him about the rain, about how the marigolds still bloomed every summer, about how I finally learned to make a decent roast. I'd tell him how sometimes I felt angry at him for leaving, and then guilty for feeling that way. It's strange, how love and resentment can live side by side in a heart for so long and never kill each other. There were nights I'd wake up from a dream where he was calling my name. His voice always sounded the same, warm, teasing, alive. I'd sit up, whisper back, "I'm here, James," and stare into the dark until the dream faded. Then I'd fall asleep holding that seashell he sent me, the one that still felt like him somehow. The town got quieter as I got older. The kids I used to babysit had grandkids of their own. Sometimes they'd stop by and bring pie or flowers, saying things like, "Miss Evelyn, you're a legend around here." I'd laugh and say, "More like an old ghost." They didn't know half of it. One summer, I went through the attic to clean out some boxes. Dust covered everything, old photo albums, James's books, our wedding picture. The glass was cracked, but his smile still shone through like sunlight. I sat there, staring at it, remembering our wedding day. I was 21, barefoot in a borrowed dress, laughing at how the preacher's voice cracked when he said, "Till death do you part." I never thought those words would become a question instead of a promise. I kept that photo with me after that, framed new, placed right beside the window where the light hit it just right in the mornings. Every sunrise I'd tell him, "I made it another day." It became our little routine, the only kind of communication left between us. Then one day, I found something that stopped my heart cold. It was buried deep in an old trunk, a letter I didn't recognize. The envelope was addressed to me but never opened. The postmark was from years back, maybe the year the war ended. I didn't remember ever receiving it. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside, the handwriting wasn't James's. It was neat, careful, unfamiliar. It was from a man named Samuel Green. He wrote that he'd served in the same unit as my husband. He said James had been badly injured in a blast, evacuated to a medical base overseas. The letter said James was alive at the time it was written but unconscious, and that he'd asked Samuel to send word to me if anything happened. But the letter had never been mailed. It had gotten lost in the shuffle of war and bureaucracy, only reaching me decades later because some clerk somewhere had finally done their job. I read that letter until the paper almost tore. He'd been alive. For a while. Somewhere out there, breathing under the same sky, while I was home counting the days. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. The not knowing had been its own kind of torture, but knowing I'd missed him by inches of time and miles of silence, that was worse. That night, I lit another candle and sat in the dark, holding that letter in my lap. I whispered, "You were so close, James." I imagined him lying in some field hospital, maybe thinking of me, maybe whispering my name. I wanted to believe he wasn't alone when he left this world. I wanted to believe love had reached him, even if the letter hadn't reached me. After that, something in me shifted. I stopped waiting. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally accepted that love and waiting weren't the same thing. I could love him without living in the pause. I could remember without staying frozen. So I started small. I joined the library book club. I took painting classes again. I even started walking on the beach in the mornings. People smiled at me, called me by name, and I started to smile back. Not out of habit, but because it felt good. One morning, while watching the sunrise, I caught myself whispering, "You'd love this view, James." And for the first time, it didn't make me cry. It made me smile. I realized I'd spent most of my life living in the shadow of a love that never ended. But maybe love wasn't supposed to end. Maybe it just changes shape, like the tide, pulling away, returning, never really gone. I still kept his letters, still talked to his picture, still wore my wedding ring. But it felt different now. Not like grief, but like gratitude. Gratitude that I got to love someone that much, even if the ending was written in silence. Years rolled by. The world kept changing. Phones got smaller, cars got faster, people forgot how to slow down. I stayed in my little house by the sea, painting sunsets and writing in a notebook I called The Letters I Never Sent. They weren't for him this time. They were for me. Little notes about forgiveness, about letting go, about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting and start living again. One night, while sorting through that notebook, I came across the seashell he'd sent me all those years ago. I held it to my ear like people do when they want to hear the ocean. I smiled because I swore I heard his voice. Faint, distant, but warm. "I'm proud of you, Ev." I whispered back. I know. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel alone in that house. Just peaceful. Quietly, beautifully peaceful. It had been more than 40 years since the war when the phone rang one chilly afternoon in November. I almost didn't answer. It was raining outside, and I'd been dozing in my chair by the window. But something told me to pick it up. A man's voice came through, polite but hesitant. "Mrs. Harper?" "Yes," I said. "Who's calling?" "My name's Daniel Green. I believe you knew my father, Samuel Green." The name hit me like a soft echo. Samuel. The man who wrote the letter, the one that reached me decades too late. My chest tightened. Yes, I did," I said carefully. "He served with my husband." Daniel took a deep breath. "My father passed away last year. When I was going through his things, I found a box labeled, for Mrs. Evelyn Harper, if ever found. Inside were journals and some photos. He wanted to make sure they reached you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The world tilted, memories flashing like old film reels. "Did he know James?" I asked softly. "He did," Daniel said. "They were friends. My father wrote about him often. Would it be okay if I sent the box to you?" I agreed, barely finding my voice. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. I looked out the window at the rain and whispered, "James, what else did you keep from me?" A few days later, a package arrived. Small, wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. My heart pounded as I cut the string. Inside were notebooks, black and white photos, and a folded letter addressed to me in handwriting that wasn't James's but was familiar now, Samuel's. It read, Mrs. Harper. If you're reading this, I'm long gone, but I couldn't leave this world without sending you what I promised. Your husband was my best friend. He saved my life, and I owe him everything. For years, I wanted to tell you the truth, but I didn't know how. Maybe now you'll understand what really happened out there. I unfolded the first page of the journal and began to read. June 14, 1969. We were pinned near the riverbank. Harper was hit trying to pull me back. He kept joking even while bleeding, said I owed him a steak dinner when we got home. Medics got to him in time, took him to a field hospital. He told me to write to his wife Evelyn, said she had the prettiest laugh in Texas. My eyes blurred. I turned the page. July 2, 1969. Harper's recovery's slow, but he keeps his spirit. Always talking about his wife, about the porch he'll build, the yellow dress she wore at their wedding. He writes her letters every night. Says he can feel her waiting. I smiled through tears. That was my James, stubborn, loving, alive in a world trying to destroy all of that. Then came the entry that made me freeze. August 9, 1969. Harper's being transferred. He asked me to keep one letter safe, said he didn't want it lost if something happened. Told me to send it myself if he couldn't. I promised I would. My breath caught. A letter. I searched the box and found a single yellowed envelope sealed tight, my name written across the front in his familiar slanted script. I sat there for a long time before opening it, afraid my heart wouldn't survive what was inside. Finally, I tore the edge and unfolded the paper. My dearest Evelyn. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I don't want you to spend your life waiting for a ghost. Promise me you'll keep living. Really living. Sing, laugh, paint, love again if you can. Don't let the world turn you to stone because I'm gone. Every time the sun rises, think of me smiling back at you. I love you, Ev. Always did. Always will. James. I pressed the letter to my lips, tasting salt from my own tears. The world went quiet, like even the rain outside had stopped to listen. For all the years I'd begged for answers, for one last word, here it was, written before I even knew how long I'd have to wait. I read it again and again until the ink blurred. Then I sat there, holding it to my chest, whispering, I kept my promise, James. I kept living, even when I didn't want to. The next morning, I called Daniel to thank him. He sounded kind, gentle, like his father must have been. I think your dad saved me too, I told him. He paused, then said, my father always said your husband was the bravest man he ever met. After that call, I walked down to the beach for the first time in months. The air smelled of salt and wind, and the sea looked endless, just like my love for him. I carried the letter with me, folded neatly in my pocket. I sat on the sand and read it one more time before letting the wind take it, the paper dancing away like a white bird against the horizon. I whispered, go home, James. When I walked back to the house, I felt lighter than I had in decades. Like some invisible chain had finally fallen away. That night, I dreamed of him, not in uniform this time, but barefoot on our porch, laughing under the glow of a summer sunset. He looked young, whole, happy. I ran to him, but instead of reaching out, he just smiled and said, you did good, Ev. Then he turned and walked into the light. I woke up with tears on my pillow and peace in my chest. The next few weeks, I started sorting through the box. Samuel's journals, photos, the fragments of lives caught between war and memory. In one photo, James was sitting by a river, smiling with a cigarette in his hand, sunlight in his hair. Behind him, a hand was scribbled in the corner. Tell her I kept my promise. I didn't know what he meant, but somehow I did. He'd promised to write. He'd promised to love me forever. And even from another world, he'd kept both. After that, I visited the Veterans Memorial downtown. I hadn't gone there before. Too painful, too final. But that day I brought one marigold from my garden and placed it at the base of the wall, tracing his name carved into the stone. My fingers lingered on each letter. "You're home now," I whispered. That night, I made peach pie, his favorite. I sat by the window, the smell filling the room, and poured 2 cups of coffee. I set one across from me, just like I had all those years ago. Only this time, I didn't feel the ache. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for the love that survived everything. Time, war, distance, even death. Love like that doesn't die. It just waits, quietly, patiently, until you're ready to feel it again. And that night, for the first time since 1968, I didn't feel like I was waiting anymore. After that day on the beach, something inside me changed for good. It wasn't a loud change, not the kind that makes headlines or turns into miracles. It was quiet, like a shift in the wind. I didn't wake up crying anymore. The mornings didn't feel like battles I had to survive. They just began. And that was enough. For the first time in years, I opened the windows and let the house breathe. The curtains fluttered like wings, and sunlight poured in, dust dancing in the air like tiny memories. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and something else, something that smelled like possibility. I started painting again. Not just small sketches like before, but real, messy, wild canvases full of color and life. I painted sunsets, waves, faces of strangers, even my own reflection once, older, lined, but alive. There was one painting I kept redoing over and over, a man standing by the ocean, looking toward the horizon. I could never get his eyes quite right, but maybe that was the point. Every morning, I'd walk down to the beach with my coffee. The same beach where I'd let James's letter fly away. Some days I'd talk to him out loud. Other days, I'd just listen. The waves had a way of answering, soft and steady, like a voice you can't quite hear but know by heart. The neighbors noticed the change. "You seem lighter, Evelyn," they'd say. And I'd smile and answer, maybe I finally put down what wasn't mine to carry anymore. I even started teaching painting at the community center. Just a small class, mostly retirees and a few teenagers who wandered in looking for something to do. One of them, a girl named Sophie, reminded me of myself at her age. Shy, curious, full of questions about love she was too young to understand. She asked me one afternoon, "Did you ever fall in love, Mrs. Harper?" I smiled and said, "Just once." It lasted a lifetime. She looked puzzled, like she was trying to figure out if that was a happy ending or a sad one. Maybe it was both. Over time, my story started to spread in town. People who hadn't spoken to me in years began to stop by the cafe or the market just to say they'd read something about me. Some article or post about the woman who never gave up on love. I'd laugh and say, "Oh, don't believe everything you read. I gave up plenty of times. I just didn't stay there." One afternoon, a young journalist from a local paper showed up at my door. She said, "Mrs. Harper, I'm writing a piece about love stories that stood the test of time. Yours might be the most powerful one I've ever heard." I invited her in, poured her coffee, and told her the truth. Not the fairy tale version, but the real one. I told her how waiting had broken me in half and then slowly taught me how to build myself again. How love wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes it was about learning when to let go. She asked if I regretted waiting all those years. I thought about it for a long time, then said, "No. Waiting gave my love shape. Letting go gave it peace." The article came out a few weeks later. They titled it "The Woman Who Waited, and Then Learned to Live." It made people cry, apparently. Some sent letters, others showed up at my art class just to tell me they were inspired. One woman about my age hugged me and whispered, "I lost my husband too. I thought my life ended that day." Maybe it didn't. I squeezed her hand and said, "It never does, darling. It just changes names." A few months later, I got an invitation from the town council. They were organizing an event to honor families of missing soldiers. They wanted me to speak. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure what I could say that hadn't already been said in tears and silence. But then I remembered James's letter, The one where he told me to keep living. So I said yes. The night of the event, the community hall was full. Rows of faces, young, old, hopeful, haunted, all gathered for the same reason. I stood at the podium, the lights warm on my face, and held one of James's old letters in my hands. When I started speaking, my voice shook, but not from fear. From memory. I waited for my husband for more than 40 years, I said. People told me I was wasting my life. But love doesn't measure time the way people do. Love measures moments, the ones you had, and the ones you still carry inside you. For a long time, I thought waiting was my way of loving him. But I learned that letting go was, too. The room was silent. I could see people crying, some nodding, some holding hands. I took a deep breath and added, "He told me to keep living," and I finally listened. I think he'd be proud to see that I did. After the applause, a young man approached me, not even 30, wearing a military jacket. He said quietly, "My wife's waiting for me while I'm deployed. Do you think it's fair to ask someone to wait?" I looked at him for a long time before answering. "If she loves you, she's not waiting, she's loving. But don't make her do it forever. Come home to her if you can." He smiled, saluted softly, and walked away. I stood there, heart full, knowing that maybe my story had given someone else what I'd needed all those years ago. Hope, even if it hurt. That night, when I came home, I turned off all the lights and sat on the porch with a glass of wine. The stars were sharp and bright. I thought about the bus station that morning long ago, the sound of engines, the crowd waving, the promise of letters. I thought about the years in between, the silence, the waiting, the discovery. And I thought about the woman I had become because of it all. I whispered into the night, "You see, James? I didn't waste the life you wanted for me." A soft wind rustled through the marigolds, and I could have sworn it sounded like laughter. His laughter. The same one that used to fill the house, warm and effortless. I closed my eyes and smiled. In that moment, I understood something I never had before. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It ends when you stop remembering them with joy. And I wasn't done remembering. Not even close. It's funny how life circles back to where it began. I used to think time moved in straight lines. You're born, you love, you lose, you fade. But as I got older, I realized it moves in loops, like the tide. It takes you away, and then, gently, it brings you home again. Now I'm 86 years old. The house is quieter than it's ever been, but it doesn't feel lonely anymore. The sea still hums outside my window, the marigolds still bloom in the garden, and the morning light still hits James's picture just right, like it's greeting him, same as always. Some mornings, I forget little things, where I put my keys, what day it is, whether I've fed the cat. But I never forget him. Never the sound of his laugh, the warmth of his hand, or the way he looked at me that last morning when he said goodbye. That memory's stitched into my bones. I don't move around much anymore. My knees ache, and the stairs feel steeper than they used to. But I still make coffee for two. I still hum our song while folding laundry. And every evening, I still light a candle by the window. Not because I'm waiting, but because it feels like saying goodnight. Sometimes, when the sunset paints the sky orange and gold, I sit on the porch and talk out loud, the way old people do when they don't care who's listening. I tell James about the things he's missed. How the town got bigger, how the kids who once played in the street now have kids of their own, how my paintings ended up hanging in the library downtown. Last month, a woman came by from the local museum. She wanted to include my story, and James's, in an exhibit about love and memory. She said, "Mrs. Harper, your letters are history." I smiled and told her, "They're not history, darling. They're a heartbeat." She cried, and I understood why. After she left, I went upstairs and opened the wooden box one last time. The letters were yellowed, edges curled, ink faded. They smelled faintly of paper, dust, and time, the scent of a life lived long and deeply. I didn't cry this time. I just smiled. I took out one blank page and wrote a final letter, not for him to read, but for me to leave behind. My dearest James, I kept every promise I made to you. I laughed, I lived, and I never stopped loving you. The years were kind to me, even when they were hard. I saw the ocean you loved so much, painted the sunsets you never got to see, and felt you in every quiet morning. If love is forever, then you're not gone. You just went ahead. I'll see you soon, my darling. Until then, good night. I folded the letter, tied it with the same ribbon I used for all the others, and placed it back in the box. Then I closed the lid gently, like tucking in an old friend. That night, I dreamed again. The dream was soft and golden, like walking through sunlight underwater. I saw the bus station, the crowd, the flags, the noise. Only this time, it was empty. No war, no fear, just quiet. Then I saw him. James. Standing there, smiling, his uniform gone, dressed in that white shirt he used to wear on Sundays. He looked young again. So did I. He walked toward me, slow and steady, and for the first time, I didn't run to him. I just waited. When he reached me, he took my hand, and it felt like coming home. He whispered, "You waited long enough." And I laughed. That same laugh he always said he loved. Then everything around us turned into light. Warm, endless, peaceful. When I woke up, it was morning. The candle had burned out on the windowsill, and the sunlight filled the room. The sea breeze drifted in, and the air felt different, softer. Later that day, the neighbor found me asleep in my chair, a smile on my face, the box of letters resting on my lap. They said it looked like I was dreaming. Maybe I was. At the memorial service, they played our song, Unchained Melody. People cried, but not because it was sad. Because it was beautiful. Because it was real. They buried me beside him, under a tree that bloomed white in spring. On the headstone, they carved our names and one simple line I'd written years ago. She waited with love, and he came home in her heart. Sometimes, when the wind blows across that little cemetery by the coast, you can almost hear laughter, light, easy, carried by the breeze. Maybe it's just the ocean. Or maybe it's us. Either way, I finally made it home.